The auctioneer's hammer struck the wooden podium with a thunderous crack, but the silence that followed was deafening. Not a single hand rose. Not a single voice called out a bid. The small bay colt with the twisted front leg stood trembling. The center of the auction ring, his dark eyes wide with confusion, as hundreds of potential buyers turned their backs on him. "Come now, folks," the auctioneer's voice boomed across the packed fairgrounds. "This here's good bloodstock, sired by Thunder Ridge's finest stallion out of a proven broodmare. Just needs a little special care." A wave of uncomfortable laughter rippled through the crowd. Ranchers shook their heads and muttered among themselves. Horse traders examined their fingernails with sudden interest. Even the meat buyers, usually eager for any four-legged purchase, seemed to find the dirt beneath their boots fascinating. The colt's left front leg bent at an unnatural angle, a cruel twist of fate that had occurred during his difficult birth 6 months earlier. Despite the veterinarian's best efforts, the leg had healed crooked, leaving the young animal with a pronounced limp that grew more noticeable when he tried to move at anything faster than a walk. $50. The auctioneer tried again, his voice losing some of its earlier enthusiasm. "Surely someone can use a good companion horse. Look at that gentle nature, that intelligent eye." But the crowd remained unmoved. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, and several buyers began drifting toward the exit. The colt's ears swiveled. Nervously, picking up the sounds of dismissal and rejection that surrounded him. From her perch on the fence rail 20 feet away, 17-year-old Cordelia Brightwater watched the scene unfold with growing indignation. Her father, Jasper Brightwater, owner of the Copper Creek Ranch, stood beside her with his arms crossed, occasionally nodding to friends and business associates who passed by. "It's a shame," Jasper murmured, his weathered face creased with sympathy. "Beautiful little fellow. But that leg, no good for riding, no good for breeding. Might make a decent pasture ornament for someone with more money than sense." Cordelia's jaw tightened. She had been coming to these monthly auctions since she was old enough to sit on a fence post, and she had never seen anything like this. The raw cruelty of it, the way grown men and women could look at a living creature and see only its flaws, only its limitations, made her stomach churn. The auctioneer's voice grew increasingly desperate. $30? $20? Surely, someone can see past a little imperfection. But Cordelia wasn't looking at the crooked leg. She was watching the colt's face, studying the way he held his head high despite the obvious pain and fear. She saw something in his dark eyes that the others missed. A spark of intelligence, a flicker of spirit that refused to be dimmed by his physical limitations. When the colt turned his head and looked directly at her, Cordelia felt her heart skip. In that moment, she saw not a damaged animal destined for an uncertain fate, but a creature with untapped potential, waiting for someone to believe in him. The auctioneer raised his hammer one final time. "Going once for $20. Cordelia's hand shot into the air. "Delia, what in the Sam Hill are you doing?" Jasper's voice was sharp with surprise, but his daughter's hand remained raised high above her head. $20, the auctioneer called out with obvious relief. "Do I hear 25? The crowd turned to stare at the rancher's daughter, their expressions ranging from amusement to bewilderment. A few men chuckled and shook their heads. Old Mortimer Crenshaw, who owned the largest spread in 3 counties, actually slapped his knee and laughed out loud. "Girls got more heart than sense," someone muttered. 25. The auctioneer tried hopefully, but the crowd had already written off the transaction as a foolish whim. Going once, going twice. The hammer fell. "Sold to the young lady. For $20. Cordelia climbed down from the fence, her boots hitting the dusty ground with a soft thud. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes following her as she walked toward the payment booth, her chin held high despite the burning in her cheeks. "Cordelia May Brightwater," her father said, catching up to her in 3 long strides. "You mind telling me what you think you're going to do with a lame colt?" "I'm going to prove everyone wrong," she replied, counting out $20 from her carefully saved allowance money. "That horse isn't broken, Daddy. He's just different." Jasper studied his daughter's determined face and sighed. In 17 years, he had learned to recognize that particular expression. It was the same look she'd worn when she'd insisted on breaking her first Mustang at age 12. The same stubborn set to her jaw that had appeared when she'd announced she was going to compete in the county barrel racing championships despite being the youngest rider by 3 years. "Different doesn't put food on the table or win races," he said gently. "Sometimes the kindest thing is to accept reality." But Cordelia was already walking toward the holding pen where the Colt waited. The animal's ears pricked forward at her approach, and she could see the tension in his small frame begin to ease slightly. "Hey there, beautiful," she whispered, extending her hand slowly. The Colt sniffed her fingers cautiously, then allowed her to stroke his neck. His coat was soft as silk, a rich bay color that gleamed even in the afternoon shadows. "What are you going to call him?" Jasper asked, resignation in his voice. Cordelia considered for a moment, watching the way the Colt held himself with dignity, despite his obvious disadvantage. "Defiance," she said finally. "His name is Defiance." The ride back to Copper Creek Ranch was quiet, except for the steady clip-clop of their horses' hooves, and the occasional snort from the Colt following behind on a lead rope. Defiance managed the 3-mile journey without complaint, though his irregular gait was more pronounced by the time they reached the ranch gates. As they approached the barn, Cordelia's younger brother Joaquin emerged from the tack room, took one look at the new arrival, and burst into laughter. "Seriously, Delia, you bought the gimp horse? Wait until I tell the boys at school. They're going to die laughing." "Joaquin," Jasper's voice carried a warning tone. But Cordelia barely heard her brother's mockery. She was already planning Defiance's rehabilitation in her mind, thinking about the gentle training methods she'd read about in her horse magazines, considering how to build his strength and confidence without putting additional strain on his damaged leg. That evening, as she settled the Colt into a clean stall with fresh hay and water, Cordelia made him a promise. "I don't care what anyone says," she whispered, rubbing his forehead. "We're going to show them all what you're really made of." Defiance nickered softly and nuzzled her shoulder, as if he understood every word. The first month was harder than Cordelia had expected. Defiance's leg required constant attention, warm soaks, gentle massage, and carefully monitored exercise to prevent further injury. Dr. Amelia Thornfield, the local veterinarian, examined the Colt twice and shook her head both times. The bone healed wrong, she explained to Cordelia and Jasper in the barn. "There's nothing we can do to straighten it now. He'll always have that limp, and any serious exertion could cause him real pain." "But he's not in pain now, is he?" Cordelia asked, watching Defiance lip at the hay in his stall. "No, not at rest. But pushing him too hard?" Dr. Thornfield shrugged. "I just don't want to see him suffer." After the vet left, Cordelia spent hours researching alternative training methods. She studied books on therapeutic horsemanship, watched videos of horses with similar disabilities, and corresponded with trainers across the country who specialized in working with problem animals. Slowly, she began to develop a routine tailored specifically to Defiance's needs. Instead of the traditional round pen work that most young horses received, she focused on ground exercises designed to build his confidence and strengthen his good legs. She taught him to navigate obstacle courses at a walk, to respond to voice commands, and to trust her completely. The breakthrough came on a crisp October morning 6 weeks after the auction. Cordelia was working with Defiance in the small paddock behind the barn when her father approached with Tobias Whitmore, a neighboring rancher who was known for his skill with difficult horses. "Heard you've been working with that crippled Colt," Tobias said, leaning against the fence. "Mind if I watch?" Cordelia's jaw tightened at the word crippled, but she nodded. "Come on, boy," she said to Defiance. "Show them what you can do." What happened next surprised everyone, including Cordelia. As she led Defiance through his routine, the Colt seemed to sense the audience and began to perform with an enthusiasm she'd never seen before. He navigated the ground poles with precision, backed up on command, and even attempted a playful rear when she asked him to say hello. "Well, I'll be damned," Tobias muttered, his eyes following the Colt's movements. "He's got more coordination than most sound horses." But the real revelation came when Cordelia decided to try something new. She had been reading about a technique called natural horsemanship that focused on communication through body language rather than force. Standing in the center of the paddock, she simply looked at Defiance and shifted her weight slightly. The Colt responded immediately, moving into a smooth, collected trot that favored his good legs, but didn't seem to cause him discomfort. His head was high, his ears forward, and for the first time since his birth he looked like what he was, a proud, intelligent horse with noble bloodlines. Holy cow, Joaquin breathed from his perch on the fence. He's actually graceful. Cordelia's heart swelled with pride, but she kept her expression neutral. He's always been graceful, she said quietly. People just had to learn how to see it. Tobias pushed his hat back and shook his head. Girl, I've been training horses for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like that. That colt's reading your mind. Over the following weeks, word began to spread throughout the county about the miracle horse at Copper Creek Ranch. Visitors started arriving unannounced, curious to see the animal that had been the laughingstock of the auction just 3 months earlier. Cordelia didn't mind the attention. In fact, she welcomed it. Every person who saw Defiance perform was one more witness to his capabilities, one more voice that might speak up the next time someone dismissed a horse based on appearance alone. But she knew that demonstrations in a small paddock weren't enough. If she really wanted to prove Defiance's worth, she needed to find a way to showcase his talents on a larger stage. The opportunity came in the form of a flyer tacked to the bulletin board at the feed store. Annual County Fair Horse Show. All breeds welcome. Special categories for unique performances. Cordelia stared at the flyer for a long moment, then carefully tore it down and folded it into her pocket. It was time to take their partnership to the next level. Absolutely not. Jasper's voice was firm as he set down his coffee cup. Delia, I admire what you've done with that colt, but a horse show? In front of hundreds of people? What if he gets spooked? What if he injures himself? Cordelia had expected this reaction. She had spent 3 days rehearsing her arguments, preparing for every objection her father might raise. Daddy, we've been working together for 4 months now. He's stronger than he's ever been, and he trusts me completely. Trust doesn't fix a crooked leg, Joaquin interjected from across the kitchen table. What if you fall? What if he falls? You'll both end up looking like fools. We already look like fools to most people, Cordelia replied. At least this way we'll be fools who tried. Jasper studied his daughter's face, seeing the determination that had carried her through countless challenges over the years. What exactly are you planning to do? You can't enter him in regular events, jumping, racing, reining. He's not built for that kind of competition. The flyer mentions special categories, Cordelia said, pulling the crumpled paper from her pocket. Exhibition classes for unique performances. I've been thinking about creating something that showcases what Defiance does best. His intelligence, his grace, his ability to connect with people. Like what? Cordelia took a deep breath. A liberty performance. No saddle, no bridle, just the two of us working together. I've seen videos of trainers who do it with sound horses, but I think Defiance could do something even more special. His limitations have made him more attentive, more responsive. He reads every shift in my body language, every change in my breathing. Jasper was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the pasture where Defiance grazed contentedly, alongside their other horses. The colt had filled out considerably since his arrival, his coat gleaming with health despite his physical imperfection. If you're going to do this, he said finally, you'll need help. Professional help. That's how Cordelia found herself standing in the indoor arena at Maverick Stables, watching renowned trainer Clementine Rossiter work with a magnificent black stallion. Clementine was known throughout the western states for her innovative training methods and her ability to create breathtaking performances that seemed to blur the line between horse and human. So this is the famous Defiance, Clementine said, approaching the colt with quiet confidence. I've heard quite a bit about him. You have? Cordelia was surprised. She hadn't realized their reputation had spread beyond the county. Tobias Whitmore. He's a friend of mine. He called last week, said I needed to see something special. Clementine extended her hand to Defiance, who sniffed politely, before allowing her to stroke his neck. He's beautiful. Tell me what you two have been working. Cordelia demonstrated their routine, watching as Clementine's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine fascination. The trainer said nothing until they finished, then walked slowly around the colt, studying his movement from every angle. His balance is extraordinary, she murmured. Most horses with this type of injury compensate by throwing their weight around, but he's learned to carry himself with perfect precision. How did you teach him that? I didn't, Cordelia admitted. He figured it out himself. I just gave him the space to do it. Clementine smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. That's the mark of a true horseman, knowing when not to interfere with genius. Yes, I'll help you, but I have one condition. What's that? We do this right. No half measures, no shortcuts. If you're going to put this horse in front of an audience, he needs to be absolutely perfect. Are you prepared for that level of commitment? Cordelia looked at Defiance, who was watching their conversation with alert interest. We've come this far, she said. I'm not stopping now. The training that followed was unlike anything Cordelia had experienced. Clementine pushed both horse and rider to their limits, demanding precision in every movement, grace in every transition. She taught Cordelia to communicate with Defiance through the subtlest of cues: a shifted weight, a change in breathing, a slight turn of the head. He's not just performing, Clementine observed during one session. He's dancing. And he's dancing with you. 3 weeks before the county fair, they had their routine perfected. 8 minutes of pure artistry that showcased every one of Defiance's strengths while never once drawing attention to his weakness. It was, Clementine declared, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, but Cordelia knew that beauty alone wouldn't be enough. When they entered that arena, they would be facing an audience full of people who remembered the lame colt from the auction, people who expected them to fail. The question was, would they be able to prove those people wrong? The day of the county. Fair dawned crisp and clear, with a hint of autumn in the air. Cordelia had barely slept, her mind racing through every element of their routine. Beside her in the horse trailer, Defiance stood quietly, occasionally stamping his feet, but otherwise calm. You nervous, boy, she whispered, reaching through the slats to touch his neck. Because I'm terrified. The fairgrounds were already bustling with activity when they arrived. Horses of every breed and discipline were being unloaded, groomed, and prepared for their various competitions. Cordelia noticed the stares and whispers that followed them as they made their way to the assigned stall area. Isn't that the girl who bought the crippled horse? What's she doing here? This is a real horse show. Someone should tell her this isn't a charity event. Cordelia kept her eyes forward and her chin up, but each comment felt like a physical blow. Beside her, Defiance seemed to sense her tension and pressed his shoulder against her arm reassuringly. Don't listen to them, Clementine said, appearing at her elbow. They're about to eat their words. The Liberty exhibition was scheduled for late afternoon, giving Cordelia hours to watch the other competitions and build her anxiety to nearly unbearable levels. She groomed Defiance until his coat gleamed like polished bronze, braided his mane with silver ribbon, and made sure every piece of their equipment was perfect. You ready for this? Jasper asked, finding her in the warm-up area an hour before their performance. No, Cordelia answered honestly, but we're going to do it anyway. As the afternoon wore on, word spread through the fairgrounds about the unusual exhibition planned for the main arena. By the time their slot arrived, the stands were packed with curious spectators. Cordelia could see familiar faces scattered throughout the crowd: neighbors, schoolmates, other ranchers who had been at the auction 8 months earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed across the arena. Please welcome Cordelia Brightwater and Defiance in a Liberty performance. The crowd fell silent as Cordelia led Defiance into the arena. The Colt's limp was more noticeable on the hard-packed dirt, and she heard a few scattered chuckles from the stands. But as they reached the center of the arena, and she removed his halter, something magical happened. Defiance transformed. The music began, a haunting melody that Clementine had chosen specifically for their routine, and Cordelia raised her hand in the opening cue. Defiance's head came up, his ears pricked forward, and suddenly he wasn't a disabled horse anymore. He was a dancer, moving with fluid grace around the arena's perimeter. The crowd's laughter died away, replaced by an awed silence. Defiance moved through their routine flawlessly, responding to Cordelia's subtle cues with perfect precision. When she asked him to rear, he rose like a statue coming to life. When she called him to her side, he flowed toward her like water finding its course. But the most breathtaking moment came halfway through the performance. Cordelia stood motionless in the center of the arena, while Defiance circled her at a collected trot. His irregular gait transformed into something that looked almost like a specialized dance step. His head was high, his tail flagged, and his eyes never left her face. "My God," someone whispered in the stands. "He's beautiful." The routine built to its climax with a series of movements that showcased the incredible bond between horse and human. Defiance lay down on command, then rose. Gracefully to his feet, he backed away from Cordelia, then returned to her at a gallop, sliding to a stop just inches from where she stood. For the finale, Cordelia simply extended her arms and smiled. Defiance approached slowly, majestically, and gently touched her forehead with his muzzle. The music swelled, then faded to silence. The arena was so quiet that Cordelia could hear her own heartbeat. Then, from somewhere in the stands, came the sound of applause. Slow at first, then building to a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. People were on their feet, cheering and crying and clapping until their hands hurt. In the front row, Cordelia could see Mortimer Crenshaw, the man who had laughed at her purchase, wiping tears from his eyes. "Unbelievable," the announcer shouted over the crowd noise. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've just witnessed something truly extraordinary." But Cordelia barely heard him. She was looking at Defiance, whose eyes were bright with intelligence and pride. He knew. Somehow he understood exactly what they had accomplished together. "We did it," she whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. "We actually did it." The applause continued for a full 5 minutes, and when it finally began to die down, Cordelia saw something that made her heart swell with pride. The other exhibitors, the ones who had been whispering about them earlier, were approaching the arena fence, wanting to meet the horse they had dismissed as worthless. But the greatest satisfaction came from the look in Defiance's eyes. For the first time in his life, he had been seen not as a damaged animal, but as the magnificent creature he had always been. 2 years later, Cordelia stood at the edge of the same auction ring where she had first seen Defiance, but this time, she wasn't a spectator. She was there as a trainer, representing the Copper Creek Therapeutic Riding Center, a facility that had grown from a single stall and one special horse into a renowned program that helped both animals and people overcome their limitations. "Lottie, number 47, the auctioneer called out. A 3-year-old mare with a minor club foot, structurally sound, just cosmetically imperfect. Cordelia watched as the chestnut mare entered the ring, her gait slightly uneven, but her spirit clearly intact. The crowd's reaction was predictable. A few half-hearted bids, mostly from meat buyers, and the general assumption that this was another horse destined for an uncertain future. But something had changed in the years since Defiance's triumph. Scattered throughout the crowd were faces Cordelia recognized, people who had witnessed that magical performance at the county fair, who had seen firsthand what was possible when someone looked beyond surface imperfections. $200, called out a voice from the back. It was Helena Fairchild, a wealthy widow who had become one of the therapeutic center's most generous supporters. $250, countered another bidder. $300. The mare sold for $600 to a family who planned to use her in their children's riding program. As she was led from the ring, Cordelia smiled. The change hadn't happened overnight, but it was real and lasting. The therapeutic riding center had become Cordelia's life's work. After graduating high school, she had studied equine therapy at the State University, then returned to expand the program that had begun with a single horse named Defiance. The center now housed 20 horses, most of them animals that had been considered unsuitable for traditional purposes, but had found new meaning in helping children and adults with disabilities. Defiance himself, now 8 years old, was the program's star. His gentle nature and incredible sensitivity made him perfect for working with clients who needed extra patience and understanding. He had helped dozens of people overcome their fears, build confidence, and discover their own hidden strengths. "Miss Brightwater?" A young voice interrupted her thoughts. Cordelia turned to see a girl of about 10, wearing a purple cowboy hat and a determined expression. "My name is Brianna Colton. I was wondering, could you tell me about that horse?" Cordelia followed the girl's gaze to a pen near the back of the auction facility. Inside stood a young stallion with a pronounced scar running down his left flank, probably from a barbed wire encounter. He was thin, nervous, and clearly traumatized, but there was something in his eyes that reminded Cordelia of another auction day long ago. "He's been through a lot," Cordelia said gently, "but I think he's got potential. Nobody else is looking." "At him," Brianna observed. "They all walk right by." "Sometimes the best horses are the ones other people overlook," Cordelia replied. "But taking on a horse like that is a big responsibility. It takes patience, dedication, and a lot of hard work." Brianna nodded solemnly. "I know, but I've been reading about your horse, Defiance, about how nobody wanted him either. But you saw something special. What makes you think you can help this one?" The girl considered the question seriously. "Because I know what it's like to be different. I have a prosthetic leg, lost my real one in a car accident when I was 6. People sometimes look at me the way they're looking at that horse right now, like there's something wrong with me that can't be fixed." Cordelia felt a familiar tightness in her chest. "And what do you think about that?" "I think they're wrong," Brianna said simply. "I think being different just means you have to work harder to show people what you can do. But once you prove yourself, nobody ever forgets." That afternoon, Cordelia found herself standing in the same spot where she had made her first impulsive bid years earlier. But this time she wasn't bidding for herself. She was bidding for Brianna Colton, using funds from the Therapeutic Center's adoption program. The scarred stallion sold for $35, even less than Defiance had commanded. As the hammer fell, Cordelia saw the spark of joy in Brianna's eyes and knew that another special partnership was about to begin. Later that evening, as the sun set over Copper Creek Ranch, Cordelia stood in the pasture watching Defiance graze peacefully alongside the other horses. His limp was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined him. He was a teacher now, a healer, a living testament to the power of seeing beyond limitations. "You started something, you know that?" she said, scratching behind his ears. "That little girl today, she's going to change that stallion's life. He's going to change hers. All because you showed everyone what's possible." Defiance nickered softly and bumped her shoulder with his nose, as if to say he understood. And perhaps he did. Perhaps he had always known that his real purpose wasn't to be the fastest or the strongest or the most perfect horse. His purpose was to be the one who proved that perfect wasn't necessary, that heart, spirit, and determination were worth more than any physical attribute. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Cordelia made her way back to the house, leaving Defiance to his peaceful evening routine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new horses to heal, new people to inspire. But tonight, she was content in the knowledge that sometimes the most crooked paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. Behind her, Defiance lifted his head and whinnied softly into the night, a sound of pure contentment that carried across the pasture like a blessing. He had found his place in the world, and in doing so had helped countless others find theirs. The crooked-legged Colt that no one wanted had become exactly what he was meant to be. Not despite his imperfections, but because of them. And that, Cordelia knew, was the most satisfying ending of all.